So pleased to have me today, my first two-time guest on the show. He's the author of There's Just One Thing, his memoir about his time on creative and WWE. He's also the co-executive producer with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Danny Garcia on Vice's Tales from the Territories on Tuesday nights and on Young Rock on NBC. It's Brian Gewirtz. Brian, welcome back to Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversation. So happy you're here today.
Hey, Phil, thank you. There's just one problem is I know we have a very familiar relationship now, this being a recurring guest and all. So you can call it There's Just One Thing. But,
Yeah.
in case anyone wanted to, look it up.
I heard JBL's flub on Briscoe with Bradshaw, and it just stayed with me, I guess.
Yeah, that's okay.
So in your past creative role, you kind of had to be in the moment of what was going on. With these shows that you're working on, you're diving more into the past of things that happened. What kind of things do you learn working on either of these two programs, and does any of it cross over?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like Young Rock and Tales from the Territories.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, in Tales from the Territories, the stories that we're hearing from the legends themselves. I'm in the process of watching the Stampede, the cut of the Stampede episode with Bret Hart and Abdullah the Butcher and Dr. D. David Schultz. And, it's like I'm hearing stories that, obviously I've read Bret's book and I know, stories, contained in that and from what I've heard in locker rooms and my time in WWE. But it's really, truly amazing when you're actually hearing stories, most of them I'd never heard before, coming from the people themselves. And it's kind of the same on Young Rock too, because we have a story session with Dwayne and the producers before every season. And he tells us stories that, a lot of them I'd never even heard before, especially the ones about his dad and his grandfather and his grandmother. So yeah, there's a lot of importance not only in hearing the stories, but making sure you're interpreting them correctly on the scripted show on Young Rock and doing them justice in the reenactments and the recreations that we're doing on Tales from the Territory, and just making sure that the entire package is presented, with both a nod to entertainment, because it is at the end of the day supposed to be entertaining, but also with respect and reverence and, not wanting to get anything wrong in the retelling of the show.
How many of the stories on Tales from the Territories had you heard before, and how many of them were just kind of brand new to you? Wrestlers can be some incredible storytellers. And I've seen that on the first few episodes.
It's funny because there's it's kind of a mixture. A lot of these stories I had heard or had heard of, and the legend of, you hear something like, oh, Ken Patera threw a McDonald's, late at night and got arrested for it. Whether it was a rock or whether it was a chair, whatever it was. Or you heard Jimmy Hart got, hit with a blow dart in Memphis, and you hear these stories, but you don't really hear the details of them, and you don't hear the first person accounts of them. And, the beauty of Tales from the Territories is we have multiple people, as you know, on these roundtables who can also call out people if they like, wait a minute, that's not how I remember it, and that kind of thing. It's really, really cool just to hear the depth and hear the attention to detail. And some of these stories, morph into urban legends over the course of time, where you have there's a kernel of truth, but what I heard is something different. And that's that's the cool thing about attending, some of the roundtables, that when we were shooting them in Atlanta, and just being a fly on the wall, because at a certain point you while you're still trying to keep your producer hat and you have your, your little clipboard and your, the headset and everything else, you also just become a fan, and just sit back and just absorb the stories. And, if there was popcorn on craft service, I would take it, because it was, just like having an exclusive, almost, intimate performance going on of these stories that you've heard in passing or haven't heard at all, or have heard very well, and just, taking it all in and just loving every second of it.
You mentioned Ken Patera. I thought he was the star of that AWA episode. I really enjoyed all of everything you get from having Ken Patera on one of those shows.
Oh yeah.
It's just all there for everybody. Even getting, he mentions he's denying, not to give any of it away, but like he's often denied that he threw the boulder through the McDonald's in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and seeing everyone's reactions at the table to that were like, this is, and his reactions to them. It's just I think you guys will really enjoy it because I had fun watching it. So
yeah, no, thanks. And the other thing too that I love, about our territory show on Vice is, obviously Dwayne, myself, $7 in general, we all have a deep connection to WWE. It's where we grew up. It's where we worked. It's where Dwayne performed. But there's like a whole world, obviously, as everyone knows, outside of WWE. And this show really concentrates on that because it basically is all the territories that were thriving and existed for decades before WWE came into existence. Well, not came into existence, but basically, I want to say monopolized, but basically went national. Yeah. So we have a lot of guests on. You don't see Ken Patera on, WWE produced shows. You don't see Dr. D. David Schultz. You don't see Abdullah the Butcher. You don't see like a ton of people. There are obviously, familiar names as well that you do see on WWE programming, but like we're really like happy that we were able to really branch out and get some talent that, you don't normally hear from.
What do you think fans will like the most about this new show on Vice?
I just think it's, just this really, I don't want to say like it's, I don't want to imply that WWE programming and other, programming involving wrestling is sugar-coated or sanitized or whatever, but WWE is a publicly traded company and they have, a certain set of standards that they had to adhere to, and everything ties back to the fact that it is a publicly traded company and, everything affects everything else. This one is sort of unencumbered by that. And just like, you just really, and it's certainly like not a WWE hit piece or anything like that. There's nothing to do with WWE. That's one of, I think, the cool selling points about it is that we hear so much history through the spectrum of, the winners, whatever that phrase is, the victors get to write their history. I'm right. Screwing that up, but just basically the fact that like this is stories and history that's like slowly eroding over time, because if we didn't have the opportunity to tell the stories, a lot of these stories kind of like die in the locker rooms and die, within, just the wrestling circles and are kept to that inner circle. Like we're basically telling these locker room stories that have become legendary and, telling them to the world so that they live forever. I mean, that's really the intention behind the show.
And I know you worked a lot in WWE with Michael P.S. Hayes directly. Were some of the best like story times you heard when you were in WWE was hearing some of the stories from him?
Oh yeah. I mean, everything involving Michael Hayes, and we're happy, we did reach out to WWE and we're able to have Jerry Lawler and Michael Hayes be a part of the show. So that was very cool. And yeah, I mean, Michael is a gifted storyteller. He's just a gifted character in general. He's like 40% of my book is Michael Hayes' story.
I
know. So yeah, I mean, it's really, really cool to see him, in his element, talking, with fellow legends, because at the end of the day, even though he's a very brilliant mind and a brilliant behind the scenes, producer for decades now, he's a performer and he's always been a performer. He's very, very young. It's hard to imagine like ultra young Michael Hayes is one of the fabulous Freebirds, but he's been in this business forever and has such a, wealth of stories and experiences and stuff that is, normally unspeakable in 2022, the stuff that he was doing on the road and, just the crazy antics he'd get into.
I think he was like 21 or 22 years old when he and the Junkyard Dog worked in the Superdome for Mid-South too. Yeah. I mean, he was literally just a baby when you consider like how long his run is in pro wrestling. It reminds me, and I was just kind of thinking about, in terms of telling stories and stuff like that. I had the opportunity when I was in college to have Sidney Schanberg as a teacher, who was the Pulitzer winner who they made the Academy Award winning film, the Killing Fields, after his life. And he wrote the Death and Life of Death Prawn. And at the end of all of our classes, we always had story time with Sid, where we just get to ask him anything we wanted to about his life or his career or anything like that. And it was like such a great highlight. I don't remember 75% of that class, but I remember most of the story times, and I remember most of the stuff that happened outside of the classroom too. So it's fun when you get to hear about things from, the people directly involved. So I had this conversation with Jerry Lawler many years ago about Andy Kaufman and should Andy Kaufman be in the Hall of Fame? First of all, how much would you have enjoyed trying to write for Andy Kaufman and work with him collaboratively? He's one of my absolute favorite figures in wrestling history. Just what's his importance in pro wrestling to you?
Well, as you know, from the book and everything, obviously I never worked with or interacted with Andy Kaufman, but my uncle did. My uncle was the writer on all the Latka episodes of Taxi.
Right.
So like my real first exposure, my uncle and his writing partner, they wrote all the Latka episodes for multiple seasons on Taxi. And that was really, because I was always, an event when one of my uncle's episodes of Taxi was on the air, and I was a little kid when it was out. But that was really my first exposure to network sitcoms, really, was watching those Andy Kaufman episodes. And I just knew him, as a kid, as the lovable, Latka Gravis. I didn't know the extent of, Andy Kaufman's genius until much later. But yeah, he is without question. I mean, look, WWE Hall of Fame, is a, it's an interesting thing because sometimes it's not like the Baseball Writers Hall of Fame where it's just, based on statistics and certain thresholds. And did this person hit X amount of home runs or get hits or wins or strikeouts or whatever? It's kind of like forged by, whatever is discussed that happened to be discussed that year. But from a pure merit standpoint, there is probably no celebrity more influential and more, just revered in the business than Andy Kaufman. I mean, what he did in Memphis, it's why we dedicated a whole episode to it, is just really extraordinary. Like, he had no reason other than his pure love and passion for wrestling to go down to Memphis. And of course, as we've talked about on the show, and as legend has it, he tried with WWF at first, and Vince Sr. just wasn't into the idea. Obviously, Vince Jr., Vince McMahon, as we know him, obviously did pay attention to what was going down in Memphis, because
Right.
thereafter, just a couple of years later, Mr. T is wrestling in the main event of WrestleMania, and Cyndi Lauper is in the corner of Wendy Richter, and Billy Martin and Liberace and Bob Costas and everyone else, Muhammad Ali, everyone is involved in the first WrestleMania. But Andy, as someone who wrote for the guest host era, there is a lot of there's a lot of, from publicists and stuff like that, like understandably, wanting to make their clients and their the people that they're representing not look like a horse's ass. That makes sense. Andy had no such fear of that. He would look like a horse's ass. He would, he relished getting booed and playing the heel in Memphis and making fun of the people and the women, the men. Obviously it was wrestling women at first and then segued into Jerry. And not just, it wasn't just like they're going to have a match and that's it. As we explained and showed, the Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman angle lasted for a long time in many iterations. I mean, at one point, Andy seemingly turned babyface only to turn heel on him again. It was just amazing to watch and so ahead of its time and so unprecedented that, yeah, obviously Andy deserves to be in many Hall of Fames, and
Yeah.
WWE is definitely one of them.
Yeah, I just always love watching. It never gets old for me watching Andy Kaufman footage again and again, or hearing about it from, yourself, talking to David Arquette a little bit about it over the years. Jerry Lawler, Bill Apter has a great perspective on all of this, being right in the middle and being the person who helped him connect with Lawler too. So it's just, I absolutely love it. I think they could induct him, get Bob Zamuda out there, do something, have Tony Clifton come and accept the Hall of Fame accolade on Andy's behalf. half or something. But I think there's so many things you can do with it.
Yeah,
I
it would
think
be really nice. And yeah, it would be the right thing to do as far as cementing his legacy. But even if it doesn't happen, I mean, his legacy is cemented. I mean, people who know, and people who don't know, hopefully, saw Tales from the Territories episode and got a much better, broader understanding of him.
so on the other side of what you're doing, this sort of period piece, for lack of a better term, Young Rock, it really makes it clear that crazy scenarios in pro wrestling make for a great backdrop in other forms of entertainment. What do you think about that?
Sure. I mean, look, every time I know, I had I wouldn't say a cup of coffee. I was in WWE for 16 years, but I am never more popular or sociable outside amongst friends and amongst people I'm meeting for the first time than when I'm telling, WWE stories. It's quite possibly all I got. But the wrestling backdrop, even in my experience, is I've always been, it's kind of the impetus for me writing the book. It's always been a very big crowd pleaser. And the fact that, you have on Young Rock four different timelines, if you include Dwayne's current future 2033 timeline, of eras to explore and talent to explore between the 80s, the early 90s / late 80s, and the late 90s, where you see the this season the evolution of Rocky Maivia into The Rock. It's so cool, and there's never more fun. I never have more fun on set than when it's the wrestlers outside of the arena, when they're just either hanging out in a diner or hanging out in someone's house or going shopping, or Macho Man Randy Savage opening up a Sears, as we did last year, and him being just so into the idea of Sears, and just seeing Kevin Makeley, our Macho Man, just go nuts, like, oh yeah, it's on sale, like all that kind of thing. It's so much fun to see and do. Wrestling is, a lot of the times throughout history, it's been like kind of self-contained into wrestling, in the world of wrestling in and of itself. So it really gives me a lot of pride to be able to take that world and help produce a sitcom on NBC, where it's shown in they're actual human beings, they have actual relationships, they have actual fears and anxiety and everything else. It's just not just, I'm going to pin you and get the winner's share of the prize money in the ring or win the title. It's like, obviously it's so much deeper than that. And yeah, it's just never not fascinating.
You might have answered it a little bit right there, but what's been the most rewarding part for you personally of producing Young Rock for NBC?
I mean, really, like it's seeing the finished product on the screen and seeing the audience's reaction to it. And, there's just like, we're just watching it unfold. Like the process of meeting with Dwayne before the season starts and hearing him unfold his stories. And then, you work on set, 11, 12 hours a day, working with the actors and actresses and all the writers and producers and the crew, and Jeff Chang and Anachka Khan, who are our showrunners and our, co-creators of the show, just have a brilliant way of being able to take those stories and mold them into 21 and a half minutes of episodic television that's just both funny and also, at a lot of times, like truly emotional. On a personal note, myself, Dwayne, and Hiram wrote an episode last year, the one where it was Rocky Maivia, where Dwayne Johnson's first ever match. He wasn't even Rocky Maivia yet. He was just Dwayne Johnson, wrestling a dark match in Corpus Christi. And we just took a lot of pride in being able to, write the script. And then, for me being down in Australia for 2 seasons as we were shooting it and being on set, answering any questions any of the actors have about the world of wrestling or Dwayne's experience, or in some cases where I didn't know, just being able to text Dwayne. And even though, there's an 18-hour time difference, depending on where Dwayne is, him responding almost all the time, almost instantaneously. Because, this is a passion project for him too. It's his life. It's his family's life. So yeah, I mean, just being able to like broaden the world of wrestling, beyond the ring and seeing the finished product. I know that's kind of like a obvious answer, but it's a truthful one.
Yeah, and it's such good stuff too. I mean, just personally, it just seems so fun, and it's such good stuff for the fans to be able to enjoy. Even if yes, you want to get it beyond the wrestling fan necessarily, but for the wrestling fans, it's good too.
Yeah, totally.
I saw The Rock recently on social media noting that being near his family on that show sort of felt like the real deal. How important is it for you guys to get as close to the real article of some of these wrestlers as you can? I saw like the Captain Lou Albano guy was like, it literally looked exactly like Captain Lou Albano. So
yeah, it's real important. And yeah, what you're referring to, just to expand on that is, in the past, mainly due to the pandemic, Dwayne shot his scenes in his 2033 timeline with Randall Park in the United States, either in Los Angeles or Atlanta, and we shot in Australia. And this year, we're shooting everything in Memphis, wrestling hotbed, as you know, in a place where Dwayne made his mark, before he got called up to WWE. So this was like literally the first time outside of Zooms that Dwayne could meet Stacy, Anna, Joe, who plays, his family, Uli, Bradley, Adrian, who plays like the different versions of himself, and meet them all in person. So it was really, really cool to watch them all interact, because I'm down there, I see them every day. Even I lose track of the fact that Dwayne has talked to them and Zoomed with them, but never actually physically met them before. And yeah, that was like super cool. And he poured his heart out into his Instagram stories, talking about that. It's like, when you see Joe Anderson in the Rocky Maivia makeup and the sideburns and the hair, and his Rocky Johnson, wrestling gear and everything else, he really does morph and transform into Rocky Johnson. It's crazy. It's also crazy that Joe is still like in his late 20s. It's absolutely nuts. Because he looks a lot older, when he's playing Rocky. And then, after the season's over and the sideburns come off and he shaves the mustache and everything, it's like, oh yeah, you look like some young 20 something. Now I get it. But it's really, it's an amazing transformation, and he embodies him. It's not just looking like him,
right.
Dwayne tells the stories about his dad and his dad's attitude and his dad, his interactions with other wrestlers in the locker room. And Joe's just a sponge. He just takes it and absorbs it. And really the whole cast does. Ada, Dwayne's mom, who, we see all the time and is one of the biggest wrestling fans in the world, probably. Stacey Lee Lewis, she just embodies her sweetness, her love for the business and for her family. It's really important to get right. And, thankfully, I think it's safe to say that we have been getting it right, and like, I'm sure I know there are people who watch Young Rock with a scorecard and say, wait a second, hold on a second. Andre the Giant never fought the Iron Sheik at PPW in 1985. What is happening here? Who do I call? But it's not that type of show. It is
Right.
is a fiction show. It is not a documentary. It's based on real events. And the truth is, Leah Maivia, had a great relationship with the McMahons, and they did let their talent wrestle in Hawaii. All the promoters did, for her promotion. So yeah, it's taking, the household names, some households, some not, and, trying to make an entertaining show out of it. But everything is based on, reality, real people, real relationships, real situations.
Yeah, I will admit that I do that with documentaries, though. I actually do have the
it's fair.
scorecard, like the Andre the Giant one. I'm like, I also read the book too, and I'm like, X, Y, and Z, not exactly, but close, But
Yeah.
especially in a sitcom, you're going to have more artistic license to kind of, maneuver people where you need them to do, because you're literally telling the story yourself. So,
our episode, for instance, like, I wanted to make sure that Mantar was in the episode, and Mantar, because it's just a great visual. I mean, where else in wrestling are you going to see a guy with a giant, I don't know, bison head on, on top of his body, try to enter a wrestling ring? And I think technically speaking, Mantar's time in WWF was, a few months before Dwayne Johnson showed up to do his dark match in Corpus Christi. And, we talked about it, and it was like, you know what? It's a risk we're willing to take. The 5 people who might be looking up when Mantar debuted and when he left and when Dwayne Johnson had his dark match. It's like, you know what? I think they'll be watching anyway. And if not, so be it. It wasn't meant to be.
So we're going to move on to what we call the 3 count now. It's going to be 3 quick questions and your thoughts. So you were at Raw on Monday night. We're recording this on October the 13th. What were your takeaways from the show, and how easy is it for you to watch wrestling when you're going there in that capacity?
It's so easy because I don't have to do anything. It's like, when you go, it's like visiting. I don't know. Sometimes I remember after college, as college freshmen sometimes do, they go back to high school and visit their old teachers and say hello and walk around. It's like, the pressure's off because you're not expected to actually do any work. You're just there purely to enjoy it. That's the complete opposite of actually working there, where it's nothing but stress and nothing but like, where are we on time and how are we doing on the show? And is this pre-tape shot? And even if you shot your backstage vignettes, and sometimes they're live, sometimes they're pre-taped, you're still in my position as the lead writer, overseeing the entire show and making sure everything is shot and done. There's just so much, and even if you are done with everything for that night, there's a lot of talent coming up to you, asking you about, next week and the week after and the direction of their character, as they should. It's probably the only time they have to do that in person. So, the amount of pressure and responsibility and, just this tidal wave of stuff that you have to deal with when you actually work there versus just like, I'm going to just show up and, eat a giant pretzel and enjoy the show. It's night and day. And I went with Uli, who plays 23-year-old Dwayne, and he got a nice little pop and spotlight.
Yep.
And that was the first WWE show he had ever gone to.
Wow.
And he just had the time of his life. So it was really cool. And I just enjoyed it too. I mean, look, there's plenty of times I'm watching like, I would have done that. Or I would have, I even texted Ed Koski at one point after a match and said, you know what, next time, what if you did this, that, and the other thing, but just as a, hey, I'm here, why not? But not under any, like, I'll always kind of watch it with that eye, but if they do it, great. If they don't, I'm still sleeping at night.
What do you think of the Bloodline?
I mean, they're probably the best act going right now. Really. It's like, I remember I used to give notes, when I was consulting with WWE, and, the Usos would come out and they were great in the ring. But, they'd come out, they'd do their big entrance, they'd have a great match, and they'd go to the back, and that was relatively it. And it's not really, that's not their fault. It was just like, that was the opportunity they were given. And that's what, they did what they were given. And I always thought to myself, like, man, if Jimmy and Jay actually, craft specific personalities and traits, and you could clearly tell one from the other, and give descriptions based on their personality and character that isn't based on their wrestling moves. One's friendlier, one's a little short-tempered, one's, all that stuff is coming out now in the, in the storyline with Sami Zayn, and we got to see it. And it's really cool. It's a really cool dynamic. And that's why they're flourishing so much, because you actually get to see individual human beings and differentiate them. And that's where the magic happens, when you're able to do that. And that's not even getting into Roman yet. And Roman is, the headliner of the group and everything. So, it's really cool to see when, like, there's no better feeling, when you're working backstage at WWE, when a storyline is truly clicking, and you're like, oh, we got something here. And we got something here with multiple characters. And when you have multiple characters, you can have Roman do his thing, let's say with Logan Paul coming up, and at the same time have that, dynamic with Sammy and Jimmy and Jay, and, who knows what's, Brock's return means with Heyman and everything. Plus the kid they just called up. So it's really cool to see.
Yeah, I mentioned to our producer, Lynette, before we came on the air that I would definitely buy the honorary Oos t-shirt And
Yeah.
I really think that there's an opportunity if they take the Jey Uso angry face and put that on a T-shirt and call it Usi or Stay Cool or something like that. I think they've got a lot.
That's the other
going for them.
benefit. Yeah, merchandise.
Yeah. So second question, you are Mets general manager Billy Epler. What changes this offseason?
Well, I mean, you obviously are losing almost, I don't know, 80% of your pitching staff.
Yeah.
I think Scherzer and Drew Smith are the only ones guaranteed to be back next year. So, yeah, there's a lot of decisions to be made. And I know, and obviously, too, the offense went away at the end of I was there for all 3 playoff games. It was
Oh,
kind
wow.
of painful. Yeah. I'd love to. I'd love to bring back everybody. Obviously, you got to bring back Diaz. It would be great to bring back Nimmo. He really came into his own this year, and to me, even though I think maybe it's split. I mean, it's not split, but like there's question amongst the fan base in terms of like, well, Jacob deGrom, 34 years old, best pitcher when he's healthy and right, but he hasn't been healthy the past 3 years. Is it worth it to have 2 guys with the gigantic, upwards of 40 to maybe $50 million contract for 3 years and what have you, and the risks that come with that? For me, as the type of fan that just like took so much pride in, David Wright having his entire career as a Met, it always killed me when Strawberry left, to go to the Dodgers, and Gooden ultimately left. And, he's obviously I was a little kid when it happened. I didn't realize the impact at the time, but Seaver, getting traded too. I love the franchise player that stays with one team their entire career, and the relationship and the bond with the fan base. And it's like no other person, can lay claim to them. Derek Jeter is always a Yankee. You can't, you don't have that weird, there's, here's my 1989 Keith Hernandez in Cleveland, baseball card, even though obviously he had a whole gigantic career in St. Louis beforehand. But like, I would absolutely love, even if it doesn't make sense, the fan in me would love to see Jacob deGrom a Met for life. There's an entire pitching staff. Most of the offense, save from Nimmo, is coming back, but there's work to do on the pitching side, and they need to score more runs and a little more power as well. Sorry, Phil, I can go on for probably like.
Oh yeah, me too. I think they should hang on to deGrom, and I've told multiple people in the last week that despite what's been said, I think that every team in Major League Baseball should be talking to Aaron Judge after the walk season that he had. I don't think you should limit yourself. Just, he's not going to come here with the Mets. You have to make the offer. Like it makes no sense not to. Like, you just look what he did.
That was the Wilpon era of there's no way he's going to come here. Yeah. Now, Steve Cohen, anything's possible.
Yeah. So last question, of all the personalities on Tales from the Territories and Young Rock, which of those wrestlers would you most like to have written for?
That's a great question. There's like written for and just worked with. Because like when you watch,
you can do both.
Yeah, well, it's true. Like when you watch Randy Savage, it's like on the one hand, it's like, well, how could I possibly write, for Randy? Maybe not his promos, because his promos, and all the wrestlers in that era, they did their own promos, and they crafted their character perfectly. But just to write storylines for him and angles, and he was amongst some of the best ever. The Mega Powers, the Jake Roberts, with the snake biting his arm, the Ultimate Warrior retirement thing with Elizabeth come running back into the ring. And that's just scratching the surface. He's always been a favorite of mine, and someone that I would have loved to have worked with, if our eras had lined up properly. And yeah, I mean, like as far as Tales from the Territories, I mean, I don't know. I can't be more opposite than Mad Dog Vachon, but it would have been quite an experience to have been able to work with him at one point. Obviously, he doesn't need a writer either, but it still would have been pretty cool.
What's crazy about Mad Dog Vachon is I think if my memory is right, I think he was still kind of hanging around the WWF when I started watching in about 85.
Yeah.
I think he was still doing some local shows and randomly in matches on primetime sometimes. So he was somebody who was like, I didn't really know why he was there, or that he was a very older guy, but like I didn't totally get it. But my goodness, so there's some Mad Dog Vachon stories on this season of Tales from the Territories. So check those out. So again, we'll mention Vice Tales from the Territories on Tuesday nights at 10 p.m. Young Rock starting back up on NBC on Friday, November 4th at 8 p.m. And Brian Gewirtz, thank you so much for joining us again. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, always fun, always a pleasure. And hopefully we could be, one day a 3-time guest.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.